Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing meeting. Appreciate everyone being here tonight. We've got a number of recommendations that we will be presenting. Elections for a new co-chair and possibly an alternate co-chair position. I just ask if everybody can mute themselves for the meeting. I don't know if
I have some really great color pens.
Any, I don't know if Claudia, if you can mute folks. Get the phone number giving us feedback right now. There we go. Perfect. I don't know if there's any staff announcements that need to be made before the meeting starts, before we go around and do introductions of members.
Well, we were just trying to go through the couple of Zoom housekeeping for anybody new.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, I'll be very brief. This is the mission statement. These, as you know, PCCEP is tasked with a variety of different things. It's an especially important committee right now, as it is always, but especially right now in time of transformational change. So the work of the committee is crucial. You can go over to the next slide. I'm not going to read through everything, but I think it's important that we're all here, and it's important that we engage in all of these discussions with the group values in mind, as PCCEP members always do with each other. These are all the PCCEP group values, and I would ask that anybody on this call exercise these group values. Please do not engage in violent speak, hate speech, or any kind of white supremacy. You will be removed immediately. But these are the PCCEP group values. We can go ahead to the next one. Please keep the sound off unless you're talking. If it would be great if you could also take away your videos so we can focus on the PCCEP members, so they can have their space to converse with each other. This is going to be a meeting where we vote. The PCCEP members, I would ask that PCCEP members private message me your vote when you do vote for a new co-chair, and then I'll tally the votes and I'll announce the new co-chair, and then that will be that. If there's, in case of any Zoom bombing, staff will handle that. But aside from that, I thank you all sincerely for being here, and thank you PCCEP members. We're going to go. Also, I wanted to mention real quick, this is a new thing, but oftentimes there will be conversations in the group chat. I would ask that this be treated like any other PCCEP meeting in person, and that we refrain from using the group chat from asking all the time. There will be a time for community comment, and I would ask that you save your comments for the time for community comment. Allow PCCEP members to have the space to speak, and then they can respond to your comments or questions in that time. The order will be PCCEP, community, and then any city or PPB members, and that's the order we'll go in to speak. That's my contact information. Please feel free to message me or email me or text me or call me. Yeah, for any reason. Thanks very much for being here.
Appreciate it. We're going to go around and just do introductions of PCCEP members. So when I call your name, you can just give your first and last name and any subcommittee that you sit on or any leadership position that you have within PCCEP. Let's start with Amy. Oh, and pronouns too, please. We're going to come back to Amy. Britt. Hit it twice in a row. Yolanda.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name's Yolanda Salguero. My pronouns are she and hers, and I am co-chair of the youth subcommittee.
Thank you. Vadim.
Hi, everybody. Vadim Mazursky, he, him. I am a PCCEP secretary as well as on the settlement agreement and policy subcommittee and the behavioral health subcommittee.
Thank you. Marcia.
Good evening, everyone. Marcia Perez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the chair of the Racial Equity Subcommittee.
Thank you. Elliot?
Elliot Young, I use he, his pronouns, and I am alternate co-chair and also sit on the race and equity subcommittee.
Thank you. Taji?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Taji Chessman. I use he, him pronouns. I sit on the youth subcommittee. Thanks so much.
Jamari?
Jamari Ethely, he, him pronouns, and I'm also on the youth subcommittee.
Anne?
Ann Campbell, I use she, her pronouns, and I sit on the behavioral health subcommittee. Thank you for being here.
Amy, back to you.
Good evening, everyone. This is Amy Anderson here. I am the chair of the behavioral health subcommittee.
And then Britt, are you here?
Yeah, sorry, I'm having some video problems here, but hello everyone. This is Britt and I am with the youth subcommittee.
Great. Lakiana, he, him pronouns, co-chair PCCEP, and also on the racial equity subcommittee. Again, we want to thank you all for being here. Want to also acknowledge that Black Lives Matter, and that is a continued conversation that's happening in this city and happening across the country. And it takes many forms. It's not just about police violence, but it's about the rights of people to live and have full lives. One of the issues that is going under the radar right now in our communities is community violence. We had another young man that was killed last night. So I thought we would just open with a moment of silence for all those who have been impacted by violence in our community and those impacted by Black Lives Matter. So we'll just take about a 30-second moment of silence. Thank you. I would also be remiss if we didn't mention the young man that was killed, Mr. Ford, 19-year-old young man, just recently graduated from high school, also a young father. So we send our thoughts and prayers, well wishes to his family. We also have the protests that are going on downtown, and people are marching, and so we hope for their safety. And also the officer safeties that are also involved, regardless of our position of how we feel about them, and that we ask the law enforcement agencies to use their de-escalation tactics and find nonviolent ways to end or address the situations that are going on downtown that are not just about downtown, but about the city in general. So that's our thoughts on that. PCCEP did pass a recommendation advocating for the ban of tear gas. And there's been certainly discussions elsewhere about how else we can support. And for the law enforcement leaders that are on the call, elected officials that are on the call, PCCEP is ready to support dialogue and conversation and anything that is going to lead to a reduction in violence here in Portland. We're going to start with subcommittee reports. PCCEP has 5 subcommittees if you include the steering committee. So we'll start with the youth subcommittee. Yolanda, Taji, Britt, and Jamari.
Yeah, the update's quite brief initially, and my other colleagues can add anything else. But we had the opportunity to meet with the mayor a few weeks ago and talked specifically in regards to the recommendation we were able to pass back in June. There was quite some success in the sense of the mayor being interested in expressing interest and finding ways we can make it plug into city stuff along with county stuff. And so there's continued work happening to increase collaboration efforts between the city and the county in regards to the whole recommendation, and a ton of smaller pieces there, but that's like an overarching idea. We also have 2 youth applicants that should be having their interviews in the near future. So they should be hopefully able to participate and join on as soon as August and into September. And anyone else on the youth subcommittee can add anything else.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's go with Marcia and the Racial Equity Subcommittee.
Concerns related to kind of lack of restraint by police during the protest. Some shared concerns about houseless people being triggered and traumatized, while others stated that they've witnessed protesters taking care of folks that are living downtown. So we got an interesting perspective there. We know that young people are very engaged. There's been obvious concerns with federal police presence and engaging in what seems to be guerrilla warfare downtown. But folks don't want to lose sight on the fact that Portland police has been escalating violence instead of using de-escalation tactics. This is all per reporting by the community at the last meeting. We also took a moment of silence to acknowledge the significant increase in gun violence around the city and the impacts that it's happening on communities around all over really the city, and the increased need for collaborative efforts around the city and county and community programming. We reviewed the recommendation, which we'll get on the next part of this meeting tonight, but we were able to hear some feedback from community members related to the recommendation that's being put out by the Racial Equity Subcommittee, and then discuss the future of the work, which is hopefully a Say Her Name event at the end of August. So if folks are interested in participating in that, please let us know. Thank you.
Can you also just speak to the collaboration with Ms. Joyce Harris and just recruiting Black women to the PCCEP?
Yeah, so Ms. Joyce and I have met a couple of times just to check in about how to increase and center Black voices, specifically Black women. We heard from Black women in the last few meetings and wanted to honor that and create that space for not only recruitment to have Black women on the committee and apply, but also centering an event hopefully we can plan through the framework of Say Her Name in August. And so we have yet to meet again for planning, but we are going to follow up in coming weeks to check in on that.
Thank you. Let's turn it over to Amy in the Behavioral Health Subcommittee.
Yes, we had a wonderful time. We are currently doing an educational series on the behavioral health unit in finding out how each of the different departments responds to a call. And I also had a guest speaker who was talking about health inequities and racial just inability to be able to get good health care based upon race and ethnicity was another big discussion. We're going to continue our education series this coming meeting on August 4th. We'll be learning more about the ECIT teams and how they operate within the community. Now, I do want to use this moment right now because I want everyone to know that there's a huge issue going on downtown that many of you may or may not be aware of, and that is they have closed all of the bathrooms pretty much downtown. I went down to TriMet today and TriMet was closed. There is a serious need for washing and toileting and all kinds of things that people need to use who are homeless and suffering with mental health conditions. And I, as a worker, can't even find a place to use a public restroom. So we have a problem that's kind of maybe not unique to everyone, but it is to me and my population. So I'd like to put that out there tonight. I would like some assistance in getting these bathrooms reopened because there's nowhere for people to go. And unfortunately, they'll be peeing and pooping on the streets. without TriMet. So that was the last of the public spaces available for people. And without that, we've got nowhere to go. So I just want to put that out there publicly. We need bathrooms back. I'm done. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Amy. I can give the update for the steering committee. We discussed a number of things, including the upcoming votes that'll happen today, and just kind of figured out how the voting will work. We're going with a sequential order of voting, which means, so one of the people who's running, Elliot, occupies an alternate seat, but he's stepping up to run for the co-chair position. So the question was, do we vote on his position at the same time as we vote on the new position, knowing that Elliot had made it clear that if he doesn't receive the chair position, that he would then like to return to his alternate co-chair position. So we just established that we will use sequential voting, which means we'll go with the top position first, and then based on those results, we'll vote for the second one, depending on what the results of that outcome are. It's something that, you know, there's always been different processes from the time, not different processes, but just slightly different circumstances from the first time we voted to now doing it online. So just kind of revisiting that as needed. And then we just talked about recruiting new individuals for PCCEP. We have 3 slots that are opened up for people who have resigned. And so just coming to an agreement on how those slots are filled, whose duty it is. You know, one of the things we asked was that the staff take the lead on helping recruit those individuals. As you know, we as volunteers do our best to, like, hey, if we know people, to recruit them or to ask them to participate, but that it needs you know, staff support that has full-time effort and able to really go out there and develop the kind of candidate pool that we want. And it's always been a challenge, is keeping that alternate pool open. Part of that problem is that, you know, if we, let's say like right now, we have 3 spots open, but we recruit 10 candidates. And so 3 of them come on and we have, you know, 7 other alternates that are still in the pool, right? And the next spot might not open up till next February or March, right? So someone applied in July, and then by the time next March comes around, maybe their life has changed or things are different. And so there's not really a great solution to how we keep that alternate pool engaged based off of, you know, needs and when those spots open up, which is just, you never really know. So those are the things we discussed, and then also putting together tonight's meeting. I don't know if Vadim or Elliot, if you have anything to add or anything that was missed or things that we should mention.
No,
I'm good.
One other thing. So yesterday, the PCCEP co-chairs, so that was me and Elliot as the alternate, met with the Training Advisory Committee Chair, Candace Avalos, I want to say her last name is, and then Vadim, who's also on PCCEP, and then as well as Sean Campbell, who is a member of the Citizen, I know so Candace and Vadim are part of the Citizen Review Committee, and Sean Campbell is part of the Training Advisory Committee. And we met with the mayor, Mayor Wheeler, and Chief Lavelle. And the idea for that meeting was to have better communication between our 3 groups and the leadership of PPB, and to kind of put together a plan moving forward about how we want to share information, collaborate on what's going on in the community, and be able to be more effective in our work. Because in order for us to do our work, we have to understand the goals that they're working at, be able to communicate what we're working at and what we would like to see change. So we made an agreement to meet at a monthly time, talked about the protests happening downtown, and just where we're in agreement with things and where we have different opinions on it. So it was a very helpful meeting. Appreciate the mayor, appreciate Chief Lavelle for making time, and for the other staff members that were on that call as well. That concludes our updates. Is there any?
Yeah, Glaucana, could I just make one announcement or a report back about a meeting that Anne and I had with a group of state auditors who are auditing the police training that goes on at the state level. And so Anne and I met with them and talked as much as we could about that. We really, our purview is much more local. So we talk more about what's going on locally in Portland and generally what PCCEP does. Anne, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think it was a first meeting for me with them, and I was, it was really interesting to hear about what they do, their reach, and kind of their follow-up. And I really appreciated being a part of that and look forward to talking with them again. And they're very interested in what we're doing and our reach in the community. Thank you.
And then finally, we have our settlement and policy agreement, settlement agreement and policy subcommittee. Vadim, I know, are you chairing that right now?
Anne and I are participating, and
okay.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. But I will kind of wrap or discuss what we talked about during the last committee meeting, which was how to further the truth and reconciliation model. Before Andrew left, the SAP subcommittee passed a recommendation on going forward with the truth and reconciliation model, and we outlined the research that needs to happen in order to ascertain kind of what the next step in the framework will be, as well as outlining possible dates that we'll need to consider in the future to make sure that we're hitting milestones. We also discussed the PCCEP inclusion in the city code, kind of get input from the community members and representatives of the Portland Police Bureau that were there and the mayor's office as to what's happening and what might still need to happen. I understand that'll continue in conversations today. And then also we discussed a recommendation for officers to volunteer in the community. We've heard from several people in the community over the last year about the need to see officers in our community more often and perhaps without their uniforms and weapons being present. And this might be an avenue in which officers could be encouraged to actually volunteer, and quite a few apparently do, but to volunteer in the community as part of their official time in order to be present and understand the needs of the community that they serve. And we received some public comment about that, and that'll be incorporated into a recommendation that'll be discussed and voted on during the next committee meeting.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Anne, anything you wanted to add?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Vadim.
Cool. Before I open it up to public comments, since there was a number of people mentioning the alternates and things of that nature, if anybody, I think I've seen at least one person on this call, but if anybody is on the call that is applied for PCCEP, if you just want to introduce yourself, I think one of the important things for us to know is like who's participating in the meetings. That's really important for us as we go towards voting, to be able to know like who's attending or who has applied. So if anybody is attending that is applied for PCCEP, if you could just please unmute yourself and just just introduce yourself by name, that would be appreciated.
Hi everyone, my name is Kia.
Oh, you cut out just a little bit. Whoever that was, if you could please introduce yourself one more time.
Kia, it looks like you're frozen.
We'll come back to anybody else that has applied.
Yeah, Lakiana, hold on a sec. You want the video on?
I don't care. It is I, Barb Rainish, who is been participating with both PCCEP, probably almost all the work groups or subcommittees I've at least spied on. And I've been helping with the behavioral health the behavioral health subcommittee. Anything else I'm supposed to say? She, her pronouns?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Barb.
Oh, and I'm not on my phone because it would squawk if I turned on the sound.
Okay, appreciate that. And then I know we heard from Kia, who had technical difficulties. Anybody else who's on the call?
I applied. My name is Leah Four, and I've come to 4 or 5 of the Zoom meetings and would like to participate more.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
This is Zainab Folk, and I also have applied as well. And I've just recently began participating in different committee meetings.
Awesome. Thank you, Zainab, for being here. So I had Barb, Kia, Leah Four, and then Zainab. Anyone else who's attending? Cool. Appreciate that. So it's not a prerequisite that you attend meetings to be a part of it, but it's just helpful for us to see. And again, I think it does have an impact on who we vote for based off of, seeing people be able to participate and put names to faces. So appreciate that. Kia, I think I see you back there. If you just want to introduce yourself again one more time.
Hi, everyone. Kia Myers-Dugan, pronouns she, her. I wasn't expecting to be on camera, but I wanted to join in and see what the conversation was, but I did apply. I don't have experience being on a committee such as this, but I have had engagement with the police prior. I was down in Los Angeles and worked for an organization that served underserved youth. And so we coordinated a series of dialogue days with the LAPD and with the young people in the organization, and just to find ways to build that bond, have conversation, again, not on the street, but in a safe environment. And it was just something that I had a lot of passion for. I really enjoyed. I have a lot of experience just personally with police in my family. And so this is just something I feel very strongly about creating bonds and opening the lines of communication so that we're talking with each other as opposed to talking past each other. So I'm really glad to be here and that I had an opportunity to introduce myself.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you all of you for applying. That's really exciting to see the number of different folks. And we'll be having interviews. For those of you who aren't aware, PCCEP members are part of the interview process, as well as staff and some community partners and city leaders. So they're very transparent, open interviews. And then once they're accepted into the alternate pool, then PCCEP votes on a recommendation, which is then given to the mayor. And then the mayor makes that final selection. In any case that PCCEP has made a recommendation to the mayor on a candidate, he's always gone with those recommendations. So we definitely appreciate that. And it's something we'll talk about a little bit later, but giving ourselves further autonomy to really have control over that entire process, I think is important. So just some of the background on that. I'm going to open it up to community comment, any public comment on, I see Theo's got his hand, so he's got some point of clarification. Go ahead.
Just real quick, I just wanted to mention, I wanted to ask and see if, since we are going to have community comments on the vote for the new chair and the co-chair, I wonder if it would be good to have each member who is trying to be elected co-chair to tell a little bit about why they want to be co-chair, as well as his alternate co-chair if you want to go that route. Also, we will still have the new officials, PCCEP officials, officers elected again in November. So this will be a short election, and we're still going to have the same election in November. So just wanted to clarify that, and I'll leave that up to you all if you want to hear from the PCCEP members about why they want to be co-chair.
Yeah, I would like to have each one of them talk a little bit about why they're running, and then we're going to read the bylaws section about the officers section too. But I wanted just to close out the steering committee reports with any public comment on any of the reports from the subcommittees. If there's any comment, questions.
Chair Drury, this is Dan with Portland Cop Watch. Is it okay if I speak?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Good to see you, Dan.
So I was trying to find out when the compliance officer report was going to be coming before the public in a town hall. They didn't mention it really in the settlement agreement subcommittee this month, but I noticed on the behavioral health meeting this coming Tuesday, that's listed on the agenda. And I didn't hear that mentioned in the report back about that committee. I tried writing to Theo, and he didn't seem to have an answer about, is that actually happening on Tuesday?
Yeah, Theo's been out a little bit. We discussed it at the steering committee. I forgot to mention that, but there was a discussion about where that should go. Because our meetings are condensed now for the large meeting, we don't have 3 hours anymore. We go to 2 because of Zoom and for the sake of everybody's sanity. So the Behavioral Health Subcommittee graciously offered to host it at their meeting. So it's going to be next Tuesday, August 4th. I want to say at 5 p.m. And
we're going to start at 6:30. That way everyone can have dinner, get the kids put together. We go from 6:30 to 8. The first half of the meeting will be the COCO report. The second half of the meeting will be on the ECIT from Lieutenant Casey.
Sorry about that. Your question, Dan?
Thank you.
Yep. Good. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions?
It looks like Brian Betcone has a question.
Thank you. Go ahead, Brian.
Hi there. My name is Brian. I use he, him pronouns. Thank you for the work that you all are doing. I've been working on petitioning the mayor to mandate larger and permanent identification for all PPB officers. And this would look like having the personnel numbers sewed onto the front and back of all officers. And this step would increase accountability to Black and brown individuals. And I'm just on here today to ask if it's not something you all have already done, if PCCEP will please consider adding this to your list of recommendations. And also I see that Mr. Robert King is on this call. I'd just like to ask him if he would please speak with the mayor and ask him to mandate huge personnel numbers. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Can I ask either Vadim or Marcia, would either of your subcommittees, Vadim being the policy, agreement, and settlement subcommittee, or Marcia with the racial equity subcommittee, if either one of y'all would be interested in taking up that that suggestion or that issue at your next meeting?
Yeah, I'll be glad to bring it up at the SAP meeting.
Okay. Which meeting?
The settlement agreement and policy.
Okay. So can you message Brian and get him the information for that so he can attend? Brian, did you hear that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And then I know you had also mentioned Robert King. Robert, do you just want to, is there anything you want to add or just acknowledge that you heard that request from Brian?
Yeah, I acknowledge it. I'm taking good notes and thank you.
Similar to the youth subcommittee is willing to talk about it since our meeting will be the soonest, if not the second next one happening. I realize that we don't have an August one set, so we can also talk about it in regards to just for expediting conversation and trying to move it forward. But thank you, Brian, for your input.
Is it possible for Brian to send that out to all of PCCEP? And then I think that's a good community announcement that can be sent out for, that's something that we can all review if it's on the agenda. I try to leave that space there for when I host the racial equity committee meeting, but that's several weeks from now. So we can figure out where it would fit in.
Thank you. I will put my email and just a brief overview of the idea in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, cool. So we are going to move on to elections. So as I mentioned, we have 2 spots potentially open. We have the co-chair spot is the spot that is open. Andrew resigned, and so that spot's open. Elliot, Ann, Vadim, and Amy are the 4 people who are running for that position. Is that correct?
No, I was running for the alternate.
I was running for the alternate.
Okay, so Elliot and Vadim are running for the co-chair position. Elliot currently occupies the alternate co-chair position. So if he is elected, then that spot becomes open. If he's not elected, then he retains that spot. So it all
right.
Yeah.
It all depends. Yep, it all depends on what happens with this one. I'm going to read the section of the bylaws. That's section 7. It just talks with the officers. So there's 4 positions. PCEP may elect the following officers: 2 co-chairs, 1 alternate co-chair, 1 secretary. Section B, PCEP will elect new officers annually in November. As Theo had mentioned, no member may serve in the same officer position for more than 2 years. C, resignation. An elected officer may vacate the position for any reason, which is what happened. That member will continue to participate as a full PCEP member. In this case, Andrew resigned completely because he's moving. PCEP may fill a vacant position by special election. That's happening right now. Duties: officers will be responsible for conducting PCEP meetings. Officers remain voting members of PCEP. A presiding officer will be designated at all times. PCEP may request that the mayor's office provide a culturally responsive facilitator to facilitate PCEP meetings. Officers will encourage full and safe participation by everyone, assist in the process of building consensus, and ensure all participants abide by PCEP's operating procedures. The co-chairs, office liaison, and project manager will serve as liaison between PCEP members and the city in consultation with the facilitator, if there is one, and project manager. Officers will develop meeting agendas, establish subcommittees if needed, and ensure efficient advisory process. Is there any questions from PCEP members?
Yes, Kiana. If Vadim becomes co-chair, his position as secretary opens up.
Yes.
So I don't know if that has been discussed with anyone wanting to assume those responsibilities. Can you read the responsibilities of the secretary from the bylaws?
There is no official commentary on any of the positions in the bylaws. So what I read as far as duties, section D, was everything that is outlined. What we have had,
thought there was some in the PCEP plan.
What we have had, and traditionally as secretaries, kind of been a communicator, you know, facilitating communications, kind of been a little unclear. As probably needs to be revisited at some point, because Claudia and the staff take the meeting minutes and things of that nature. Yeah, I don't know, Vadim, if you want to add to that as far as any duties you would feel that are.
Yeah, it's really just a jack of all trades. I agree. It's not a description, and you don't have to do, you know, per se note-taking duties, but sometimes presenting to, like in the past, I've helped Lakiana and Andrew present at City Council, and sort of you know, do the parliamentarian stuff, you know, referring to what our bylaws say and making sure that that sort of thing is followed as well. I think that should be a duty if it's not.
Yeah. So, any other questions on that?
We're so freaking lame.
Okay, what we are going to do is we will have Elliot and Vadim both present why they are running. We'll open it up to any PCEP comments or questions, and then we'll open it up to public comment and questions, and then we will vote. The voting will go by, you will private message Theo your answer. Do your best to make sure it's private, because if it ain't, everyone else is gonna see it. We try and protect everybody's vote, but you know, strange things have happened. Does that sound, we're all in agreement on that process? Cool. I don't know if either of you wants to go first, or how you want to do it.
Sure, I'll be happy to step up. Those of you who've been participating in PCCEP know since November, I've been in this role as alternate co-chair, which is also unclear about what I'm supposed to do in that role, but I've been acting on the steering committee and working to construct the agendas. But I think the reason why I want to be co-chair is simply to transmit and channel the what I hear from the community, what the community needs to PCCEP. And I've done that in terms of the recommendations made by various community groups around the union contract negotiations. I've done that around the banning the tear gas, around the defund the Portland police.
Stop! You're a pussy ass bitch. Fuck.
Statements that PCCEP has issued, and I would think in these few months left until November, it's a really important time to have the community's voice heard on PCCEP, and so I want to continue in that role, and that's it.
And hi, everybody. Thank you, Elliot. I've been secretary of PCCEP for a few months now, and it's been a pleasure and a learning opportunity to work with everyone on PCCEP, as well as community members and PPB members that attend our meetings. I've been very impressed with the roles Lakayana and Andrew have played as co-chairs. As y'all, I'm sure, realize, it's a complex job. You have to balance a lot, and they brought a very thoughtful, balanced view, as well as a respect for PCCEP's mission. I initially grappled with this decision to run for this co-chair position because I didn't initially intend to run, but recent events made me realize that in these challenging times, we need more than ever someone willing to bridge divides in order to achieve concrete outcomes. And so when I read the mission of PCCEP, it's to work with the mayor, work with the Portland Police Bureau, and to work with Portland's diverse constituencies to exchange information, to bring about equitable policing, as well as meaningful engagement and trust in PPB. We stand in a crossroad right now, I believe, as PCCEP. After the killing of George Floyd and nearly 60 days of protests, PCCEP can work with the mayor, PPB, and the community to reestablish that trust and move forward.
Hello. What's yours?
Vadim, everybody was muted. I'm sorry about that. We missed the last piece.
I think we're having a Zoom hacker right now.
For the time being, apologies, everyone. Vadim, please continue.
Okay, so I'm not sure where I left off, but what I was saying is that we're really at a crossroads, and now is the time to rebuild trust, and that rebuilding entails listening to all sides, listening to community members, listening to the protesters, listening to people who work for PPB as well, and bring those voices together and letting them be heard and finding a way forward. Today we have a recommendation denouncing use of force by the Portland Police Bureau, as well as tear gas, even though from what I can tell, they have not been using tear gas, and that's been outside forces that have been doing that recently. The mayor on June 6th banned the use of tear gas unless it was to prevent the threat to life and safety. And so I think in this regard, we need to, instead of just condemning what PPB is doing, bring them to the table, talk about what they're doing, and talk about a way out, and bring people together and move forward. The PCCEP has been prominent in the mayor's June 9th police reform plan. Not only is PCCEP going to be made permanent, but is entrusted with, and I quote this, re-envisioning core patrol services in order to address systemic racism. That's what we should be focusing on. That's the balanced approach. That's something going forward where we can make lasting changes to the way Portland deals with the Portland Police Bureau and the way that the police deal with the Portland community. We've met with the Albino Ministerial Alliance and the Mental Health Alliances. They've shared recommendations for making PCCEP a stronger entity, and we should be working on those recommendations. Instead of playing City Hall politics, let's focus on achieving results that will overcome systemic racism. Let's have conversations with all Portland communities on how to better our city. And yes, that includes hard conversations with the mayor and hard conversations with Portland Police Bureau, rather than condemning them in public. Only together can we achieve these positive results. And so I'd like to do what I can to help with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Vadim. Thank you both for offering that. And I think just from my position of being in the coach role, I think either of you would make great co-chairs, and you both put in a lot of work for this committee. Want to open it up to PCCEP member comments, questions for either of our candidates here. Cool. I'm going to open it up to public.
All right, sorry, I had a question. I'm wondering particularly, I think it's from just generally for both of you, is what do you think will be different about your participation as potentially the co-chair in better engaging the community, specifically Black and Indigenous people of color, youth, members of the disability community? Yeah, thank you.
So I'll take that first. Taji, thanks for asking that question. So from the beginning, one of the principal reasons why I wanted to get on PCCEP was because of the disproportionate policing of communities of color, and particularly Black Portlanders. And since I've been on PCCEP, I have worked to try to talk about the data that shows the disproportionate policing of communities of color. And so I think what I would like to do is continue to move what we know is a problem to a solution. And we've had meetings with members of the Portland Police Bureau, with members of the mayor's staff, and with the mayor himself. And I think it's time now to move towards a plan with the Police Bureau for how they're going to address what is very evidently a problem to me. And that goes for other vulnerable communities, the people suffering mental health illness, the homeless communities. All of these communities are disproportionately policed, as is shown by the data. And I think what we need to do is find solutions. First of all, recognize that there's a problem, and then find solutions to those problems. And I think that as co-chair, I will continue to do that work.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. To give you an idea of why I think I would be a little different. For the Citizen Review Committee, I held a listening session about a couple of weeks ago where we had Reverend Haynes from the Albino Ministerial Alliance, Pastor Hennessy, representatives from the homeless community, representatives from neighborhood associations, representatives from the immigrant community, bringing voices to the table that, you know, all of them have to participate in order to move forward in this. And so I'm open to hearing those voices, and I'm open to understanding how that fits into the larger framework of making policing in Portland more inclusive and more equitable. I think, you know, we should have really moved forward with the changes way more recent than this. You know, the mayor reached out to us over a month ago, almost 2 months ago, asking for us to provide input, concrete input on how to change patrol services, and we haven't done that. You know, the listening sessions we had have been very important, but those need to have results. And so I think that it's one thing to listen, and it's one thing to you know, blame Portland Police Bureau. It's another thing altogether to find effective ways in which to change the culture and change the system. And I think the way that I approach things, and I hope you realize over time, all I've been asking for is to have all sides talk about, you know, what the issues are, what the problems are, so we can come to a solution. Every time when I've voted against something, it was not because I had any qualms about what the recommendation was. It's because I felt that in order for it to be successful, we needed to understand the problem in order to find solutions to it. And so that's all I'm bringing is a more methodical approach in order to find solutions that are workable, in order to find solutions that are acceptable, in order to find solutions that'll make Portland a better place for all communities that live here.
Real quick, just to interject, it looks like we had a community comment from somebody named Darcy who would appreciate the use of the word suffering in relation to mental illness. So if we could refrain from using that, we want to be inclusive and use inclusive language. Just a reminder for all of our PCEP members, community members, it would be great if we could do that while we're having discussions. Sorry, I'll stop talking.
No need to apologize.
I have a question for both individuals. Like, what is your experience working directly with behavioral health advisory committees, either at the state, the city, the county? What's your previous experiences?
I don't know. Go ahead, Vadim, go ahead.
Thanks, Elia. So I've been on the Portland Commission on Disability, and until it was disbanded by Commissioner Fritz. Certainly in my personal life, I've dealt with the disability community and furthering the cause of the disability community, but also for the city, I've worked in that capacity. You know, you and I reformed the behavioral health subcommittee, and I hope we started off on good footing with respect to that, and I look forward to continuing working on those issues as well with you, Amy.
So as part of an effort a few years ago, I and other community members, activists, including Street Roots, developed a campaign for a passionate response to homelessness. And as part of that, we were working with the houseless community, working with the disability community to understand the needs of those communities and try to address that in terms of policies that the city has, and working with the mayor and various other city commissioners' offices.
Thank you.
Any other PCEP comments, questions? I think this is good. Okay, I'm gonna open up to public comment. Zainab, I know you dropped a question in the group chat. Do you wanna read that, or would you prefer me to just read it?
Well, you can read it, please, thanks.
So it says, bringing voices to the table is a great way to approach inclusiveness. What actions do you believe you will take in connecting the voices with clarity to the mayor and other officials making decisions? What ways would you communicate with PCEP about any updates? It's also in the chat too for y'all to.
Yeah, so thank you, Zainab, for that question. In terms of the first part of the question, I think what we've done on PCEP is had lots of listening sessions, especially the last 2 months. We've had over 700 people at those listening sessions, and I've been one of the people who's been organizing those listening sessions. But I also think it's important to not just listen to the community, but to actually take action and to channel the voices that we hear. So when Vadim references some of the recommendations that I've drafted, that has come from the community. And I believe that it's important to listen to the community and to issue those recommendations, even when they are critical of the police bureau, even when they're critical of the mayor. We are an independent body. I think that is our job and role, to remain independent. And so what I want to do as co-chair is to maintain that independence, bring those voices to the mayor and to the police bureau. And I think that that's the best way to achieve better relations between the community and the mayor. I don't think just being a body that listens to the community and does nothing is going to change anything. And I think people are frustrated, they've run out of patience, and that's why we see the kind of protests on the street. I think the time to act is years ago, and we need to do it now. In terms of bringing that back to PCEP, I think it's important to maintain those those channels of communication. I think PCCEP is good about reporting back on the kind of meetings we've had with the mayor, and we should continue to do that. This is a public group, and we should not be sort of cutting deals in private meetings. I don't think we've done that, and I think we should continue not to do that.
I'm glad Elliot thinks that we shouldn't be cutting deals in private meetings, because there have been a lot of private meetings held, and some of the recommendations that have been floated around, including Elliot's recommendation that the CRC and IPR be eliminated, as well as that the mayor should step down as police commissioner so that Commissioner Hardesty replace him. Those I think should have been vetted a lot more before being sent out and as a possibility, because those certainly come from behind the scenes meetings. So I want to have an openness. I want to let everyone know where I stand, and I think you all know where I stand, which is let's include all the voices. I think we can't make change unless we include those voices. I think if we only represent a certain portion, even if they're the right portion to represent, if we present something to the mayor, if we present something to the police chief, it's much stronger if we have a wide body in order to discuss that. If we have a lot of individuals have buy-in early on rather than at the end, I think it's a lot stronger if we have voices at our meetings to discuss what is actually being proposed, rather than recommendations being last minute where we don't have time to have buy-in or ask questions or be able to form policies around it, rather than just condemning individuals for what they do. So it's a very tense situation. I don't know if y'all have been downtown. It is a very tense situation. You have so many different forces at work, and I think we need to encompass that. I think we need to point out that this is not an easy solution. We can't say do this or don't do that without having a lot of thought. And that's all I ask, is to bring that thought, to bring people to the table who have expertise in those areas, to find out what their expertise is, to get their input on it, and then to provide that package from the community interest, from people with expertise, from people who have been working on these issues for a long time, to the decision makers, to the mayor specifically, to the police chief specifically. And that's what will make change. Thank you.
Appreciate both y'all. I think we're gonna take one or two more questions.
Thank you, guys.
Great. This is great. Patrick, do you want to read your question? Would you like me to read it? Sorry, y'all. Getting blown up with comments. Yeah, Patrick, do you want to read your comment, or would you like me to read it? I'll go ahead and read it here. Question: how do you feel about the steering committee's long-term habit? Sorry, I'm going to move my screen a little bit. How do you feel about the steering committee's long-term habit of neutering the rest of PCCEP by speaking in front of City Hall or private meetings with PPA, or inviting PPA, Portland Police Association, that's the union that represents the Portland Police Bureau, etc., to speak from the table at PCCEP meetings?
And I'll take this one I think it's my turn. So Patrick, I understand to a large extent the background from for your question. I think everything needs to be out in the open. I think we need to be transparent about why things are happening, who's meeting with whom, and the reasons behind it. I'm not sure at one point in time PPA was invited without perhaps other individuals, but there certainly could be reasons why not all parties can come to the table at the same time. But I think we need to be transparent about that and tell people that that's happening and the reasons behind it. But certainly I think if the police association is there, or the police chief is there, or the mayor is there, we should open things up to have other individuals present, as long as that's possible. And so both from the CRC as well as with La Guyana and with the Training Advisory Council, we've been working for quite some time to bring a lot of different people to the table in order to discuss how we can be better at effectuating change throughout the Portland Police Bureau and the government as a whole. And I think the fruits are coming from these efforts. I think that we're finally at a stage where we can get things done and not be talking about things anymore, but actually have concrete proposals. So thank you for your question, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I have the perspective that maybe you share. This meeting that I was invited to at the very last minute with the mayor and Chief Lavelle was the first of those meetings that I've been to. And I think before that, I felt like you that sometimes when the steering committee or the co-chairs were going before the city council or having these meetings, that it wasn't clear, even though I completely trusted in both Andrew and Lakayana, wasn't clear what the positions of the PCCEP that would be represented. And so I made clear at this meeting that we had the other day with Nicole Grant that we were not empowered to make decisions on behalf of the PCCEP, that anything we would have to bring back to the PCCEP for a vote. So I believe that it's important to have transparency there if there are going to be these smaller meetings. And I think to the extent possible, we should always invite other members to participate in those meetings. I don't think there's any, we won't have all 13 members there, but there's no reason that only the co-chair should be at those meetings. In terms of the PPA, I would not be in favor of them being brought to get a special seat at the table. I believe they could speak as part of the public, like the public has a space to speak. So that's how I would deal with the PPA.
Take one final question. We're over time, but it's an important conversation. Any final public questions? Question, we have room for one. Okay, I'm going to ask that PCCEP members private message Theo their vote, Elliot Young or Vadim Mazursky for co-chair of PCCEP, and based on the results, we will be voting for either a alternate co-chair spot or a secretary spot. Please make sure as you're voting that you are sending your message directly to Theo as to avoid sending it to the entire group.
Mine says that Theo's not in this meeting. I'm not able to send it.
I'm here, I'm sorry.
See if you can search, I see it on mine.
Have you been getting them?
Or if you can't, send it
Yeah,
to
I got
Claudia.
yours. I got everybody's thus far.
Did you get mine?
I see it too.
Did you get mine, Anne?
Nope.
You can send it to Claudia too if you can't find Theo on the list.
Thank you.
Appreciate both y'all for fielding those questions. That was awesome to see.
Yeah, I really appreciate the questions from the community. I don't know if that has ever happened before. I don't remember that from the last time, but I do think that that's a good practice.
I'm still waiting on 2 people.
Did you get mine?
Nope.
I sent it to Claudia. Because it's not working for me to send mine to you for some reason.
Okay,
Oh, Theo, sorry, I just sent it to you.
I saw that. Okay. Okay. Looks like we have Elliot, who has been voted in as the new co-chair.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations, Elliot. Vadim, thank you for running as well. So the open seat that we have now is the alternate co-chair position. And we have Ann and we have Amy. In the interest of time, we are gonna keep this brief. We'll take 2 comments from the community and 2 comments from PCCEP. I wanna give Ann and Amy an opportunity to share why they are running.
You can go first, Amy.
Thank you. My intention of running is, since I'm already chair of the Behavioral Health Committee and I've got over 20 years of advocacy work on various committees, I would very much like to sit and learn and work beside the co-chairs in improving the relationships of our community as a whole. I eventually want to run for co-chair, but at this time I want to do more learning. So that's why I'm running for alternate.
Thank you, Amy.
I think I would mirror what Amy says. I'm new to PCCEP, but I do have 33 years of experience in service, and I want to continue to serve and learn and use some of my facilitation and mediation skills to help us move forward and work together to connect the community and our city government and officials. Thank you.
Okay, we will take up to two comments from PCCEP for either Amy or for both of them.
Yeah, I guess my main question would be, I feel like both reasons sort of show your value and experience as a general PCCEP member, but I want to know a little bit more about how taking on this leadership position may differ how you would help PCCEP move forward in those positions as you would be sitting on the steering committee and having more responsibility to sort of shape how PCCEP can best serve the community and how you would use that role to the best of your ability.
Can I go first, Amy?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a great question. Thanks, Taji. I think that what I've been involved in the last number of years is more of a education and collaboration approach. And I see that as part of my role as to get us talking together versus the possibility of, as I've seen in some of our meetings and some of the work, is kind of an adversarial position. So I'd like to work towards having all voices be heard and moving the work of PCCEP forward.
Thanks, Taj, for the question. Since everyone didn't get to see my resume and everything, I have almost 30 years of intricate work with the city, county, and state governments. I co-chaired a very important behavioral health subcommittee for 8 years. I have an extensive group of network partners from the county commissioners, city commissioners. I've been a volunteer chaplain and MCDC for 25 years. I have the pulse of the community because I currently work with 40 people who are the most severely mentally challenged. And one of my jobs is to secure resources for those individuals. So during the weekdays, I kind of work the streets. I do everything on the bus. I do everything in my community. I'm downtown every single day. I've got my hands on the pulse of all communities for the most part. And I'm very, very tied in with the criminal justice system in our state and in our local government. So I definitely have a lot of friends that I've made over the years and a lot of opportunities to further this work within a multiple of communities. So that's why I think at this point, I could easily do the work because my passion is proven in the number of years that I have solid dedicated to this community and protecting the rights of everyone, no matter where they're from, but usually the most hurting are the ones that I work with the best. So I work from the ground up. I'm a grassroots operator. So I could definitely have communication and conversations with anybody.
Thank you. For the sake of time, we're gonna have to move forward. We're gonna get we're gonna take one question from the community, just for the sake of time, because we're way behind. So if someone has a question, please let it be known. Okay, seeing no questions, we're gonna move to a vote. Please message Theo. If you can't get Theo, Claudia, your chair for PCCEP co-chair. That position would be next in line if one of the, if me or Elliot were to step down or whatnot. So yeah, we have Amy Anderson and Ann Campbell.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It looks like Ann Campbell is the alternate co-chair. So the officer positions will be until November. Right now, we have the co-chairs Lakiana Drury, Elliot Young, Secretary Vadim Mazursky, and alternate co-chair Ann Campbell. Thanks both. Thank you to you both and you all for your responses. It was incredibly respectful, and I appreciate all your words. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and appreciate y'all for stepping up, and know that we do have an opportunity in November. Would also just like to note that our steering committee now is predominantly white, and so I think that that's something as we move forward that we have to be aware of and understand how that impacts how we're seen, and just move from there. I know we also do have a lot of people of color in leadership positions, and people with varying abilities in leadership positions as well. So we've got 3 spots open. And so just considering all of those factors, and as Vadim had mentioned earlier, I really appreciated the robust discussion for this. I think we would love to see this in the future, especially when we have more time for our meetings. I am going to transition though, and get us to our next part of the agenda. We have 2 recommendations. We have one presented by the Racial Equity Subcommittee, which is on policy concept, existing community advisory council audit. I'm just gonna summarize that and say it's the Portland Police Bureau's advisory council audit recommendation. And then we also have one on excessive use of force against peaceful protesters presented by Elliot. So I'm going to invite Marcia to talk about the audit one. We'll hear from, just for sake of time, we'll hear from Elliot on his, and then we'll take community or piece of comment and then community comment on both of them at the same time. Ms. Perez.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm actually going to send the updated link because I don't know that we have the updated one. So for those of you who are visual like myself, I've sent that link in the chat. We reviewed this at the last racial equity subcommittee meeting because I wanted to get community feedback related to language. And so we actually changed the word audit. I recognize that that word freaks a lot of people out. So this recommendation is really to do, asking Portland Police to conduct a thorough review of each of the advisory groups that seek to inform PPB and build community connections. So instead of an audit, we use the word evaluation. We simply want to learn more about the following groups beyond just knowing who their chairs are, but this would include the African American Advisory Council, the Alliance for Safer Communities, which I'm glad to see. I think someone is on this call today from that group, the Office of Equity Inclusion, the Muslim, Slavic, and Latino Advisory Council. So this recommendation overall would recommend that we have kind of an evaluation of what each group is doing, and that no new committees be established until a review can be completed. That would include like updating the website, which I can, if you look on the recommendation, there's a link to the website. It's pretty dry, doesn't include a lot of information. I have reviewed the bylaws. I know that some groups are working to update some of those bylaws and updating just kind of when they're meeting and what they're working on. But ultimately, this recommendation really seeks to collaborate with Portland Police and the Advisory Council members and PCCEP to do the following by updating the website to accurately reflect the mission and values that reflect the group desired outcomes by essentially demonstrating how each advisory group impacts outcomes related to community engagement. If groups feel, perceive or believe that they've influenced changes either within PPB or in their respective communities, and then how community input is actually considered or not. So if we have all of these community groups existing to bridge gaps and increase legitimacy within PPP, do these groups feel like they have what they need? Some folks within the racial equity group and community members talked about doing a survey, and we can get into the weeds about that once if this is passed, to just get a better understanding of why these groups exist and what their function is and what they need to feel like they're thriving. And to, like I said, increase legitimacy when it comes to engaging specific communities and delivering racial equity. So it doesn't appear to be just another checkbox. We want to know what PPB is doing in order to, this has been said before, to dismantle institutional racism, change the culture, and how you're using these groups to kind of overcome some of that and bridge the gaps between the communities, considering the budget cuts that have impacted certain divisions, particularly with community engagement. So that's the recommendation in a nutshell. So be open to any comments, feedback, or questions.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you know, just of everything you said, at best, those advisory committees are exactly what they say. They're bringing back information from the communities that they're representing and advising PPB. And at their possible worst, they're just names on a paper that don't do anything. And so we want them to be more of a former. And for us to better understand just like what they do, who's on them. Yeah, so awesome job, Marcia, on putting that together. Elliot, we're gonna hear your recommendation and then we'll take PCCEP comment on either of them and then open it up to community comment.
Okay, so I put the recommendation in the chat, which is linked there. So this is a recommendation, or it's rather a statement, it's not a recommendation, but because so much of our community has been suffering under the wafts of tear gas by the federal police, but also by the Portland police over the last 60 days, I thought it was important for PCCEP to make a statement. And it's true, as Vadim said, that the mayor has issued a limitation, and the city council has tried to limit the use of tear gas to life safety situations. From the reports I get from people on the street, there are people after that declaration was made who are still suffering from tear gas. And the issue with tear gas, as we talked about in the meeting with the mayor, is that it is not directed against people committing criminal acts. It is indiscriminate. It hits people who are peaceful protesters. I was down there the other night in front of the federal courthouse, and I was tear gassed. And it includes residents, people who are living on the streets, who are being fumigated with these chemical munitions. And it also seeps into people's houses, as well as to the people who are being incarcerated in the county jail right next to the federal building. So thanks to Anne's suggestion, she also wanted to include, and I think it's important, the federal agents, a condemnation of federal agents who were sent to our city, who've clearly exacerbated the use of tear gas and other munitions. But I think with all of the focus on the federal forces, it's important to recognize also that our local police, from the beginning of the protests, were using very similar kinds of munitions against our population. And we have already issued a recommendation to ban tear gas and have not had substantive communication about that back from the mayor's office. And so this is a more general condemnation of these kinds of use of munitions against peaceful protesters. And there is a line in there that says that we do not condone property destruction, lighting fires, or attacking police officers, but the kinds of indiscriminate responses by the Portland police have impacted journalists, politicians, legal observers, and peaceful protesters. So statements, one could say, are ineffective and useless, but we have no decision-making power. All we have is the power of our word and the power of our statements. And I think for PCCEP to publicly come out and condemn this would actually help build better relations between the police, local police bureau, and our citizens who are expressing their First Amendment rights to protest in the favor of Black Lives Matter. So that's why it's up there. I hope you can all see the link and read the words. Thank you.
I have a question about the statement on condemning excessive use of force against peaceful protesters. I'm looking at both of the statements that Marcia also presented. Is this the format that PCCEP uses? And then the question I have is, have these already been released to them, or is this just you're drafting this and making a decision on this?
That's a great question. So the recommendation form that Marcia and Lakayana used is the format for a recommendation. We don't really have a format for a statement. So, but these are all drafts. That it was posted on the agenda, but it is not the PCCEP statement until it is adopted through a vote by the PCCEP or rejected by the PCCEP, and then it will not be representing the PCCEP. So in current form, these are both proposals.
Thank you.
And is it open for questions now, Lakayana?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just so we know, we definitely appreciate Zainab for your comment. This is PCCEP section, and we'll have community. Obviously, we're not super sticklers about it, so appreciate you getting that in there. But yes, open it up to PCCEP comment on either of these.
Yeah, and generally I would, I guess, sort of echo what Elliot was saying in regards to the statements. I think they also serve as a valuable piece for the basis for future decision making. And if the city officials, electeds, are continuously expressing that they need to see what the community wants, and we're sort of giving them the basis and foundational pieces of that, then I don't think they really have an excuse after the matter to like not actually enact that change. Elliot's completely right. We don't have decision making in the sense of like firing an officer, stopping them using tear gas or whatever it may be. But we do have the ability to like say, if they're like, oh, well, we're using it on the folks who are, causing havoc or wreaking havoc, whatever you want to may construe it as, but the community saying, no, it's being indiscriminately used against us. We're trying to tell you this. And then PCCEP's using its platform where we have an ear to say it's being used indiscriminately. Please change that in a different format. I think it does still have a lot of power and volume and value in larger decision-making things outside of our jurisdiction.
Thank you, Taji. Marcia?
Yeah, I also want to say, I know that the Portland United Against Hate has done a similar petition talking about eliminating this false narrative that protesters are being violent, participating in violence in response to police. And so I just want to say, I know that they've done a lot of work. They've gotten a lot of signatures and a lot of support. So this would further support already existing organizations that have a lot of buy-in from a lot of community. I'm looking at their petition. And so I think that this is important to note. So thank you, Elliot, for your work on that.
I wanted to ask a question about the your proposal. In the recommendation, it calls for this evaluation, but what I think it may be lacking is calling for reporting back to PCCEP. And maybe it was just in your mind that that was implied, but I think it's important to maybe put in a line there that after the evaluation, the PPV will report back to PCCEP their findings, just to make sure that that sort of box is checked.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it probably was in my mind, and it's implied that when it's a collaboration, that we would be in the loop throughout the process of however they decide to get that information, that we would coordinate those efforts so that we do get that information. So thanks, Elliot.
I have a couple questions for Elliot. The first one was, did you reach out to Portland Police Bureau to find out when was the last time they might have used tear gas and under what circumstances they tried to use it? And if not, why not? And then the second one is, what do you think is a possibility if someone is, as you put it, destroying property, lighting fires, or attacking police officers in a crowd of thousands of people? What do you think the police should do about that?
So I did not contact the PVV. I did contact lawyers who are suing the city, who have specific cases and individuals who are complainants against the city, who, as well as the news and media reports, which amply document the use of tear gas following that order. Now, the question of life safety, what are the conditions under which life safety could be invoked, is one for certainly that different people could have discussions about. My own personal opinion, which is stated here, is that if people are committing crimes, that those people need to be targeted and arrested. If that is impossible to do, that does not justify tear gassing indiscriminately thousands of residents in a residential neighborhood. And in fact, based on the conversation we had with the mayor agrees with me on that. And he's very frustrated by, especially initially, the use of tear gas by the police. So I think this is something, he wants the state, in fact, to ban the use of tear gas. This is something that I think we're hearing from all quarters of the city, of the country, and a recognition that tear gas is just a very bad tool for trying to deal with individuals who are committing criminal acts.
Oh, so if the mayor agrees with you, why make this recommendation?
Because he has clearly not felt the need to actually enact this as police commissioner. And what I think he needs is more support from the community to say, this is what the community believes, this is what the community wants. And I think that hopefully with that, with the state legislature acting, we can actually create a city where people could feel free to go out on the street and protest for Black Lives Matter without being choked with chemical munitions.
My only suggestion to your document, Elliot, is I think it's important to note why people are out there protesting. I think if you included something about Black Lives Matter, I think that's an important thing that could be put in there, that PCCEP believes that Black Lives Matter, that and speak to not only the protests themselves, but that what they're about, and including something in there about imploring the city to redress those issues, to focus on the Black community, I think is something that needs to be in there.
Absolutely, well. That is a complete oversight, and I'll work on a first sentence that addresses that.
Yeah, it might be a couple just to state why they're there, something about Black Lives Matter, and then asking the city to take action to support the Black community here in Portland.
Yes.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Yep, go ahead.
I'm wondering if Mary Claire is on the call tonight. Is anyone here from the Portland Police? Is Robert King here on behalf of the Portland Police?
I'm here, Ann. I believe Mary Claire is here. I think Chief Resch is here as well.
Oh, hi, thank you. I was just wanting to ask the question. I want to also support what Lakiana said and center on Black Lives Matter. And I would like to know, in addition, has the Portland Police used tear gas?
Yes, they have.
And when?
I don't know what the most recent date was when it occurred. I do know that the mayor created an additional restriction in the early part of June. He asked the police bureau specifically to change their approach. It was a Sunday press release, I believe a week or so ago, that went out that indicated that the police bureau was going to engage in a de-escalation strategy, which was that they were intent on not engaging with community, that they were largely going to stay within the building. And unless there was a violent crime or an arson, they weren't going to respond. And since that time, I do not believe I'm going to go back and look at each one of the press releases and talk with PPB. I don't believe they have deployed less lethal, or excuse me, gas. I think it's only 4 times since early June, I think. So I'll follow up on that. The gas that has been deployed by federal officers at the federal courthouse next door. And just to put a little finer point on that question, Elliot represented that the mayor himself is interested in banning it. When we were on a call yesterday with the CRC, the TAC, and with PCCEP representatives, he was very clear he doesn't like CS gas. He knows and understands community concerns about it. He recognizes the impacts of how it can be, have the impacts in community that Elliot talks about. What he's trying to hold space for is in cases where if you do not use that in a very dangerous situation, that officers will then have to use just nightsticks, and then the only other thing they're left is their firearms, which his concern about that is that it could result in a higher level of force. In other words, if sticks are not successful and the encounter changes, that it could require officers use this higher level of force. So he wants to be able to protect the community from serious injury or death, recognizing that yes, there's widespread concern about it. And yes, it is impactful to community in and around where it is deployed. And yes, he has concerns about the indiscriminate use. But he's not willing to go so far as banning it at this point because he wants to preserve tools, even as difficult as it is to say that out loud, that could save a life in our community. And he and his role as commissioner is prioritizing life and safety over all the other issues that were raised and discussed about the gas. And then the one last thing, the Seattle City Council banned all munitions all less lethal munitions, including CS gas, by Seattle police officers to manage large-scale demonstrations. The Department of Justice and the federal court did a stay, and they overrode that because they agreed with the idea that if you don't have access to this as a tool, that you may have to use a higher level of force, which could be viewed as unconstitutional. So I'm just putting all that on the table to help give everybody on the call some context and a little bit more perspective on the nuances of it around the mayor's position.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. I would be interested in that information as to how many times it's been used since early June. And also, I know it's a complex issue, but I am concerned about, I thought that we were using more de-escalation techniques. So I don't want to spend more time on this. However, it's a very important issue, but I can just leave it there. And we can move on. Thank you.
Appreciate your questions and also preserving the time. I'm going to move to public comment on either of these recommendations on a review of existing advisory body councils or PCCEP statement on excessive use of force against peaceful protesters that will now include some language around Black Lives Matter in the Black community. We had heard from Zainab. Is there other comments or questions people had?
Yeah, this is Avi Klepper from the ASC. Is the floor open?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Avi.
Hi, just to introduce myself. I'm Avi Klepper. I'm the chair of the Alliance for Safer Communities. I'm here with one of my executive committee members, Elizabeth Allen. And we are very pleased to have been invited here. I want to say that I really am impressed with what this group is doing. And we feel very much in alignment, or I feel very much in alignment with what you're doing. We have existed for 25 years with the specific idea that engagement is better than non-engagement. And we have worked hard to create relationships of trust with higher level leaders within PPB and have solved problems that way. And we would like to see that continue, and we would like to align with your efforts in whatever way we can. The statement about the use of tear gas, I think is a really excellent statement. I think it really needs to be said. And I agree with whoever said that input from the community is needed to give the mayor as much support as he possibly can to show that there is a mandate for this. And I think it's timely, and I think it's necessary. As far as the proposal about what I understand are called the advisory councils, there's a bunch of different names. I have a couple of thoughts. The first one is that these councils have existed for quite some time. I know that we are 25 years old. And Elizabeth, do you know if all of the other advisory councils are around the same age? Were they all created around the same time?
Oh, absolutely not. Most of them are considerably younger, and it's really hard to keep a council going. They're nowhere near as old as we are.
Okay. All right. Well, these councils came into being at different times, but we're pretty sure that we are the oldest. And we have experienced the fact that when we have higher level leadership from PPB sitting in our meetings, we have much more of a sense of being listened to than not. And I would say for some time, I would say within at least the last year, there has been no real higher officer presence at our table. So I think that in addition to the idea of trying to get a handle on what these advisory council groups are doing and how they function, I think it's fair game to put in there something about how about creating a definite framework through which community input will be gathered and will be acted on. Because at this point, the way the proposal is framed, it's simply a research project about what are these groups doing. I really think that in order for these groups to have the function that they were intended to have, that there needs to be some kind of attention given to making sure that higher level leaders within PPB are in these groups and are participating in them and are hearing community input and then taking that back to the chief.
I'd like to say something here. The idea that we function independently and give some sort of information to the police chief that's going to enable the police chief to tell officers what to do better, I think is nonsense. What happens is that higher level officers sit at our table and begin to see us as just regular folks who need breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And they used to treat us every bit as badly as what they now do for BIPOC communities. You know, we were arrested, beat up, burned out of our homes. I can't tell you how bad it was. Anything that has happened to any BIPOC community has happened to our community, and it stopped because they had to sit at the table and deal with our grief and our hurt. So when they took away our assistant chief a couple of months back, I don't know how many, Chief Outlaw did it. I think it was because she decided we were having too much influence. It's hard to say for sure, because there's been so much turnover at the high level. But I can tell you that police assistant chiefs who leave the department because they want to be a police chief somewhere and they aren't going to make it in Portland, they go to one of the surrounding communities and their policies regarding LGBTQ change when they get to a surrounding community, because they know what it looks like to talk to someone who cross-dresses, who is he someday and she some others, who does S&M, who is bisexual or poly. These things stop being horrible mysteries to them. Instead, these things start just looking like people. And the state of civil rights with regard to our communities is probably the highest here than it is anywhere in the country. So as far as what we've accomplished, I rarely had to raise my voice to an assistant chief. You know, targeting us, as in targeting the BDSM community, is still in the statutes. They could do it legally.
Thank you, both of you, for those comments. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we open up to other folks?
I want to suggest Marcia. Yes, please attend our meetings. Don't ask for a report, just come.
And on top of what Elizabeth said, I'd like to put in one other suggestion, which is the reality of the way that these advisory councils are shown on the Portland Police website really does not give any access point for anyone who's interested. There are, at least what's displayed on the website, there are 6 of these. 2 of them appear to be in-house. One is about training and the other one is about equity, but the other 4 are cultural specific groups. One is for Slavic, one is for the Muslim community, one is for the African American community, and one is for LGBTQ. And I went through all those pages and only for the Slavic community could I find any contact information at all. So I don't really know any of the happenings going on in any of the other groups. And I think that in some way, if this policy can encourage display of contact information and make the groups more accessible to people who are interested, then I think the groups can potentiate what we are doing by working in concert together, because as it is now, we're siloed. I really don't know what is going on in the other groups.
Then that's what the recommendations is about. I'll let Marcia speak to that. And just to your point, Elizabeth, you know, it would be great if Marcia could attend the meetings, but it's not just for her, it's for everybody to be able to understand what is happening in meetings. And
Let
not everybody,
Marcia write the report. We'll tell her everything she wants to know. She'll get to see it. She'll get to ask us. She can write the report. I assure you, most people in the police department, now that they haven't been attending, they don't know anything more than she'll learn if she attends half a dozen meetings.
right, but it's not just, it's a capacity issue, right? It's not just about Marcia, it's just about like everybody wants to know, as Avi was saying. And so getting that information that's out there public and not just to like one individual to go write a report. We believe that the onus should be on the Bureau, as this is where the advisory committees are housed in, to provide that to the public rather than the public having to go individually seek out and write reports.
Actually, I went to Elliot. I reached out to Elliot because I found out through Elliot that you guys weren't even told we exist. And I've been asking about this for months and months, back when we did have an assistant chief sitting at our table. You know, they are not happy to actually communicate. We exist in spite of all of that.
Right, and so that's what we want to elevate that and be able to know the successes and challenges of the committees and how to improve them so that we can actually take that information and make them more useful. Sorry, I was reading a comment from somebody.
I'll come to your meeting. You ask me whatever you want to know. I mean, really, we need to do this committee to committee because they are not going to help us.
Well, can I interject? I appreciate Elizabeth, your perspective, and Avi. I really like the idea of creating a framework. I think that's the point, is that we are very siloed, and that's to bring awareness that these different groups exist and are not really working together. And how do we coordinate efforts so that the public has easier access to the information? And it also puts some onus on the Bureau to come back to these committees. If they're saying that the voice is important, then it takes another level of engagement and collaboration with the work that you're all doing in your individual groups. So I sent out to Avi, and I'm happy to meet with you individually, but I think ongoing conversations, I'd love to go to one of your meetings. I just didn't have any of the information. So similar to you attending our meetings. So it's not about the different committees and what you're doing or not doing, but rather the onus on the Bureau to take on and make sure that they're giving the information, allowing us to be able to communicate effectively and having public access to the different committees.
Hey,
Well,
Lapiana, this is Jamie. Can I speak?
Go ahead, Jamie. It's great to hear from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to let folks know that probably about 2 or 3 months ago, in response to just this question of the different advisory groups not knowing about each other and us recognizing that was something we needed to facilitate, I held the first meeting with all of the advisory groups, chairs and co-chairs. And that is something that Chief Lavelle will continue to do. Our thought is to do it at least twice a year so that the advisory groups have the ability to interact with each other, get to know each other. And we also have had quite a bit of interaction, I know, definitely between our Slavic Advisory Council and our Muslim Advisory Council. Both of those groups have attended other meetings. And so we're trying to facilitate that. But I just wanted to let folks know that the Bureau is aware of this and we are taking steps to address it.
Appreciate that. So let's move to any other public comment. I see Zainab. Well, actually, sorry, there is a order that we had. We had Barbara, and then we had Dan, and I just saw Zainab unmute herself. So just in the interest of time, these are the last 3 comments we're going to take. We are going to vote on them. And I predict we'll probably go to about 7:40, 7:45. So let's try and keep it in there, knowing that our meeting was supposed to end at 7:30. Go ahead, Barbara.
Hi, thank you. Appreciate all your work. I want to speak to Robert King. He said that the police need to make decisions to protect the crowd in a demonstration, and that's why they need to use tear gas. I have been to 2 of those demonstrations. I left around 10. I did not get any sense that anybody, I've talked to a few people, I did not get any sense that they felt protected by the police. Also, somebody else I know went to one, I believe on Sunday, and she said that the feds some young people started throwing firecrackers like you do on the 4th of July over the fence, And that's when they started tear gassing. And she said, since there was nothing flammable or anybody in danger, that she didn't see why they needed to use tear gas then. And so that's just what I have to say, that I think the police tend to overestimate danger in general, and in this situation in particular. Thank you for listening, Mr. King.
Thank you, Barbara. Let's go to Dan.
Hi, this is Dan Handelman again with Portland Cop Watch. I was going to bring up that I had read there was a meeting where various advisory group chairs met, but the former Chief Resch already told you about that. I should also say that the compliance officer's report indicates that they're waiting until next quarter to judge whether or not they think the police not de-escalating is a violation of the DOJ agreement. I think that's something you might want to mention in your letter if you are able to modify it anymore. I also would recommend using the term chemical agents instead of just tear gas, because they might come back and say, oh, it's CS gas, not tear gas, so you're wrong, we don't use tear gas. So I'd just be very as broad a definition as possible, because they tend to be that way. I also, just speaking again to what Mr. King said, that the police have a whole lot of weapons. Some of them are foam tipped, less lethals. I do not recommend that they use those, but there are alternates that are not hitting people directly with batons that they have already in their arsenal. So when we keep hearing using tear gas lowers there's no other alternatives except for batons or firearms, that is not true. And there's probably other things they could look into that are being developed or already in use elsewhere in the country. So I think it's really important not to fall for this. Do you want to be hit over the head with a lead pipe or a baseball bat? I don't want to be hit over the head at all, actually. So that's, and one last comment. I think that when you post your drafts to the PCCEP website, it should be labeled draft recommendation, blah, blah. So you can tell the difference between the draft and the final one, because it gets very confusing for people trying to find information on the website. And thank you.
Noted. Coming through with the knowledge once again. Appreciate that. We are going to go back to the recommendations. I'm going to have Marcia and Elliot present any updated language or roughly what the updated language is, right? Maybe we need to tighten up a few sentences afterwards, but we've incorporated X, Y, and Z changes based on the feedback from the PCCEP and the community.
I did want to say something. I've been waiting to talk about this portion of the agenda for those in the community who can speak on what he just said at drafts. I would echo a lot of things that he said as well. There are some pieces that I find from the title of it being excessive force to going specifically into tear gas, but I didn't see anything about like beatings or like other things that have happened that I've seen, related to excessive force. So I would say, I'm not sure if there's a deadline to this, but I definitely would say there should be a similar structure. When I was reading the first one from Marcia, there was definitely a structure that you could follow to understand how it was outlined. And so is there a reason why it wasn't structured in that, even if it's not a recommendation or a statement, it wasn't structured that way? And then to include what are the voices from the community that are really supporting this change, besides the mayor and some of the officials? What are the other people in the community to support? What are they saying and sharing to support this as well? This has been longer than I thought, and I'm just going to say this, that this agenda is probably very, it's a lot going on, and there's a lot of conversations going on that I don't like to leave them there. I think, what's his name, Taji? I hope that you do bring up your comment, Taji, because I think it was something that I'm not sure her name, Elizabeth, a lot of statements that she made that I understand that she's just trying to bring to the table. I just don't understand who is us and them and our community and their community. I don't know when you just find things like that. I I don't know what you're really relating to. And so I know you guys are probably a small knit community that know each other. Some of us who don't, it'll be great just to understand what you mean by that before we all jump to conclusions. All right, thank you. And I enjoyed myself today.
Appreciate the feedback, Zainab. We enjoyed having you. I see, Elizabeth, you're talking, but you're on mute. I'm going to give you a quick second to respond, and then Elliot is going to have the last piece of this so we can wrap this up.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, LGBT, transsexual, transgender, Q is everybody thrown in, BDSM and poly, and sex workers, all the communities that have gender and identity and sexual practice communities. All of them. I wear a hat. My hat is clinical sexologist. That's for everybody.
And I'll make this like less than 30 seconds, but my claim in that situation and what I was saying was that when we're talking about policing and we're talking about state-sanctioned violence, we can't talk about it in a monolith because of the historical history with policing and state-sanctioned violence in regards to not only the LGBTQ plus community, but racial communities, communities of different abilities. There's different experiences people have had with police and state-sanctioned violence. And specifically when you're talking about race and Black folks and Indigenous folks, there's a specific history that can't be solved through just understanding each other's history. It has to be better done through having a continuum and a balance in how we structure our power and how we structure the ability for violence to be controlled on our communities.
Thank you, Taji. Elliot?
Yeah, so I put in the chat some updated language based on conversations with Anne and LaKayana. And so this is what the first two lines would read now. PCCEP is committed to the Black Lives Matter movement and the BIPOC community in Portland and across the country. We are concerned that people who demonstrate in favor of Black Lives Matter on the streets of Portland are subject to the use of tear gas and other munitions. And in response to Zainab's really good point about beatings, I've changed the first line or added beatings to the first line of the statement as it was up there before. Have watched as Portland police have reacted to protests against police brutality with beatings, chemical agents, and et cetera. So I've also changed, based on Dan's suggestion, tear gas to chemical agents. So those are the changes to respond to comments that other people have made. I just want to add one thing about what Elizabeth said and Taji. I think that's a really important discussion. And also to point out that the LGBT community and the BIPOC community are not separate. There is an overlap there. People in the LGBT community are part of the BIPOC community. So we have to think about intersectionality. That's it.
Thank you for that. Marcia, any updates to your recommendation? Oh, one more thing, Elliot. Did you change the thing about gas from chemical agents from tear gas?
Yes.
Yeah. Marcia?
Yeah, thank you. So I, in the explanation of the recommendation, I'm adding another bullet, so it'd be a fifth bullet. So after the third bullet, it would be number 4. Before demonstrating the following, I liked Avi's recommendation of developing a framework. It keeps it broad enough to where we can work together and collaborate with PPB and advisory council chairs of each of the different chairs and bringing together what a framework would look like to influence leadership and getting the information out to community in ways that is meaningful, to then demonstrate how each of the advisory councils impact outcomes related to the PPP community engagement plan. So I'm glad that it was mentioned that they are working on it, that it's on their radar. So this shouldn't be a crazy new project. It should be in line with the things that we are, already working on, and just tighten that up with a better sense of community impact.
I'm muted. Thank you both for that. We are going to vote on both of these recommendations. I will go down the list. We're going to start with just Marcia's recommendation on a review of the advisory bodies of PPB. When I call your name, just say yes, no, or abstain. As we've talked about before, we really reserve abstain, or would ask that you use abstain if there's, for whatever reason, you couldn't vote on this. But I think that there's enough information for us to make an educated vote. So I'm just going to go down the list for the audit recommendation. Amy?
I vote yes on Marcia's recommendation.
Yep, we're just on Marcia's recommendation of the audit. Britt?
Yes.
Yolanda?
Yes.
Vadim?
Yes.
Marcia?
Yes.
Elliot?
Yes.
Taji?
Yes.
Jamari?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
And Lakiana, that's a yes. So that's 10-0. Okay, yep, that's right. And then now we're gonna move to Elliot's recommendation on a statement on excessive force. Yes, no, or abstain. We'll go backwards through that order, starting with Ann.
Yes.
Jamari.
Yes.
Taji.
Yes.
Elliot.
Yes.
Marcia.
Yes.
Vadim.
I think it's telling that the only people consulted were lawyers suing the city, so I'm voting no.
Yolanda.
He is a lawyer. That's
Yes.
Britt.
Yes.
Amy.
I'm going to abstain because I'd like to see more work done on it. And I don't think rushing it is the way to go, given what Robert was saying. I think more thought needs to go into this. So I'm going to abstain.
Okay. And Lakiana, I'm voting yes. So we have 8 in favor, 1 no, and 1 abstention. That recommendation passes. I don't know if I said this earlier, but the audit recommendation had 10 yeses, 0 nos. So that recommendation passes as well. Thank you all for the votes on that. Thank you to community members and PCCEP that asked the tough questions and had the deliberations and then voted with their conviction on that. This is going to wrap up the meeting. We had a conversation on codifying PCCEP. We are going to hold off on that. What I would suggest, based off of Vadim's also comment on the fact that there was a request from the city to talk about there's 2 items on the mayor's 19-point plan: a review of the patrols, that the patrol routes that the city, the Portland Police Bureau is doing, and then also codifying PCCEP. I would ask that we host a special meeting in early August to specifically address those issues and make whatever votes or changes we need to do to get those things done. I view the codifying of PCCEP as essential. So I will follow up with the steering committee on that, but that is my suggestion, that we hold a special meeting and address those as needed. The last thing on our agenda that I do want to make sure we get to is any city updates. The Portland Police Bureau has members that have attended. The mayor's office has staff members that have attended. I'm not sure if the Portland Police Association has members that have attended, but if any of those 3 groups would like to make announcements, and specifically the announcements we're looking for, things that the public should be aware of in regards to policing, things that you all are working on, updates that could be helpful around any of that work. So we'll open it up with the Portland Police Bureau. Is there any updates y'all would like to make?
Sorry, Lakiana. I thought that was going to be at the beginning, and AC Resch had just notified me she had to step away, and she was the one that was going to speak. So if anybody has a question, I could try to answer it, but apologize. We didn't think you were going to get to it. So she.
Okay. Yep, let her know we did. Is there any quick questions? No, we're 11 minutes over and it's 98 degrees in here.
I have a quick comment. I like the thought of doing a special listening session specifically for patrols as well. And I think that that's something that we can increase community engagement that affects all of Portland. So having community come out and listen and give their feedback about the impacts of how police are patrolling their neighborhoods would be really, really, I think, informative.
Thank you, Marcy. Any questions to the Portland Police Bureau? Brief, because I'm sure there could be a lot. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the mayor's office. Any updates that they would like to give on things they're working on or that the community should be aware of?
Tomorrow, the council will vote on an overhaul of the IPR system. That is a conversation that's playing out and will be voted on tomorrow. It would send a ballot measure to the voters in November. You'll see and hear council action on that. I just sent, as a reminder to Theo, the mayor's 19-point plan on reform and the actions. We're in the process. We're doing our entire team has been doing work on all of the elements of that particular plan, and we'll be putting that online shortly for people to track. We are reshaping our approach to gun violence in collaboration with the Office of Youth Violence Prevention, District Attorney-elect, and other partners. That is ongoing. As you all know, we're working on legislation at City Council to enshrine the Portland, your committee, in the city code. And just with respect to budget and access to resources, our office is working to come up with a community-centered participatory budget process that'll likely kick off in the fall budget monitoring process. And this is designed to steer funding from the city to be reinvested in community. So that's something that's ongoing. We're going to keep you updated on. As you all know, the mayor participated in a meeting with PCCEP, CRC, and TAC this last week. And just a little bit, just a few updates there. I know he's very grateful for the work that you are all doing, as is the chief. This is obviously a really critical time for the community, and there's a lot of good work that's being done. We're grateful to all you for what you're doing, and look forward to continuing to do this good work together.
Robert, could I ask, since one of the points in Mayor Wheeler's plan is in codifying PCCEP, is the mayor's going to be working with PCCEP in coming up with what that codification looks like?
Amanda Watson from our office is on the line. Amanda, do you have some more details on that process?
Yeah, thanks, Robert, and hi all. So I'm working with Nicole Grant specifically on this action codifying PCCEP. And yes, the question is you very much will be working with PCCEP on that. We wanted to have a first discussion with this group. I know we've run over time today, so it sounds like that will happen in early August. But yeah, very much want that to be a dialogue to really understand where PCCEP wants to go in the future. And I think, as Robert mentioned, there is this proposal coming to council tomorrow that relates to this whole ecosystem of police-related advisory bodies. And so we're also tracking that and how that will potentially impact PCCEP. So lots of moving pieces, but yes, definitely very much looking forward to working with this group on what codification looks like.
And one other thing, just to close it out, the language, Elliot, I'll just point out that in the resolution or in the recommendation, you use the terminology beating.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned that. I just want everybody on the call to be really clear about something. The chief of police and the mayor and commissioner expect and require that Portland police officers use force in accordance with the policies of the Portland Police Bureau. When they do, their actions are considered to be in policy. when they violate those policies, that's sustained for a violation of policy, that is then subjected to the discipline process and review, and ultimately the mayor and the chief make a decision about the level of discipline that is appropriate. The mayor and chief would not, have not tolerate beatings, just in terms of kind of characterization. And the other thing that's been very important to me is we've worked very closely with the Department of Justice to ensure that the force used does comport with national best practice as well as constitutional policing. So I just wanted to make sure everybody on the call knows how seriously and how important it is to both the mayor and the chief to ensure that officers are complying with policy and law and community expectations.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I think what we heard from Zainab and from other members of what I heard from other members of the community is that there are instances over the past couple months where it appears people have alleged that those policies and constitutional rights have been violated. Of course, that'll go through the internal review process. But I think that's where that comes from, this sense that on these occasions that has not, officers have violated policy.
Thank you, Elliot.
I would add two things to that. I think I would like to see, and I know there's been questions, if there could be public record if any officers have been disciplined for policy violations around use of force in the last 2 months. From the videos you see, I would assume that there should be, looking at it from a public perspective, and I think that would help the community know, are officers being disciplined? If the crimes of community members that have been arrested, their mugshots are posted publicly, their information is being released, and I think in the interest of transparency and being fair and just, that you don't have to post a picture of the officer, but at least some kind of public record that says what discipline has been made or if officers have been. And I think also it is important to remember that unfortunately a lot of the force that is being used is legal within the policy of the current contract and discipline matrix, not discipline matrix, but use of force matrix. And so I think that it's important to remember that even though the force might be legal, that doesn't make it right. And so that needs to be reviewed and strengthened so that there's not the kind of use of force that we're seeing now. So I don't know if you can speak to the fact that if there is any public opportunity to know if officers have been disciplined, and if there isn't, if you could please pass it along, that we would like to see that.
I will pass it along.
Okay. Oh.
Okay, I'm sorry, whoever was going to speak next.
No, it's Mary Claire, Robert. Lucky, and I would just let you know that the discipline process doesn't work that fast. So any accusations that have been made in the last 2 months would not have made it through the discipline process yet. So that information is not yet available. We're, at least expected under the DOJ settlement agreement to complete those kind of investigations within 180 days. So they go through an investigative process and an internal review and IPR and the whole bit. So it takes a period of time.
Yeah, and not even just necessarily the results, but the fact that, the same way the officers report, we've arrested 16 people yesterday and put out, this many citations and relates to the protests. I think that same thing, this week, 13 officers were flagged for a possible violation, I think would go a long way. I've read through some of the reports that are been posted on Twitter, and it's really community focused. And like, this is what the community did. This is where they infracted and did things, but there's like almost no information on what's happening with officers. And I think that that's important to know, not necessarily what happened in the outcome, but this week in regards to protest, 2 officers were flagged for possible violations. I think that would build trust in the community, because right now we have no information, and it feels like no officers have been disciplined.
I'll relay that, Lakiana. Thank you.
Thank you. I really want to wrap up this meeting. I want to thank our PCCEP staff members. I want to thank the community members that participated, the staff from the mayor's office, the staff from PPB, our ASL interpreters, Open Signal for participating, the fellow PCCEP members for engaging in the dialogues, for running for positions. Thank you all. I know Theo has his hand up, so I'm gonna let him have the last word.
Last thing, I promise. Just please, if people are on the call, you haven't been to a subcommittee meeting yet, please go to the subcommittee meetings. They're all incredible. I don't know if we've already put on the link for the website, but I will do that right now for you so you can have the calendar of the subcommittee meetings. And thanks to the committee. I appreciate you all.
All right, y'all. Have a great night. Be safe. Continue to fight the good fight. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks, Luciana.